Welcome to S2TV. This is Getting Ripped with Dr. Tiff, part 2 of our series on the carb and fat storage process. If you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you go back and watch that first, where we just really introduce the process and the relationship between eating a meal, the blood glucose impact, and then the insulin release process. Today I want to talk about how we as consumers can regulate that process and how we can educate ourselves on how to navigate certain types of carbohydrates, the timing and spacing of those foods, and how we can combine foods together to really help always keep a very moderate blood sugar level and to really minimize the insulin release process that is essential if we want to minimize fat storage and fat gain. So I want to just talk through how carbs have traditionally been categorized and how we understand the ones that are going to benefit our bodies most at certain times. Nutritional scientists initially categorized carbohydrates as simple or complex based on the molecular structure of the food. So a simple sugar being something that had one single molecule of glucose, thus very simply processed by the body. A complex carb had multiple molecules, and thus it took the body longer. More sustainable energy was the idea. So if you eat something more complex like brown rice or a sprouted whole grain bread or a whole wheat pasta, your body takes longer to break it down and it more incrementally uses that energy through the day. Whereas if you drink a soda, you have table sugar, you have a donut, where it's more of a simple, more processed carbohydrate, your body uses it more quickly and it can more simply break it down. Well, the problem there is if we just use those two categories and we say all complex carbs are beneficial or more beneficial than simple carbs, then we would look at something like a baked potato and brown rice, both a complex carbohydrate with multiple molecules of glucose, but they do very different things internally to our blood glucose levels. A baked potato has a very dramatic, quick impact, whereas brown rice, because it's unrefined, because it's still got the germ and the natural components of the fiber, then it takes a lot longer for our bodies to process, and the blood sugar spike is not as drastic. So that is a little bit misleading, and we need to really look at within the complex category. There's all kinds of nuances, and so we've come up with what's called the glycemic index, a 1 to 100 scale. And what they did is they had a cohort, an experimental cohort, and they fed a group 50 grams of straight glucose, so 50 grams of carbs, saw how that impacted their blood sugar, and then they took 50-gram carb servings of other foods. So how many carrots does it take to equal 50 grams of carbs? And they fed these amounts to people and saw how it compared to the straight glucose group. Problem: in order to get 50 grams of carbs out of a carrot, you have to eat 1.5 pounds of carrots. If you wanted to get 50 grams of carbohydrates from watermelon, you'd have to eat 5 cups of watermelon. So the serving sizes that they used in determining high and low glycemic foods did not really use relevant serving sizes to what someone typically eats. So some of the foods that are rated on as a high glycemic food, and a lot of those are fruits and vegetables, are based on irrational serving sizes. So we've come to a new point in the game with glycemic load, where this actually looks at the fiber content of the food and it looks at a typical serving size to be able to know what the glucose impact is, or the blood glucose impact is on the actual serving of the food you're eating. So without getting too mathematical and scientific, because I know all our brains work differently, basically, in order to find the load, you take the glycemic index value. So let's take watermelon as an example. Watermelon is a 72 on the glycemic index. So anything 70 or above is considered high. So it rates high on the glycemic index. If you actually look at a serving, which is traditionally a cup of watermelon, there's only about 10 or 11 grams of carbs in that cup. So I take the glycemic index value, 72, and I multiply it by the actual grams of carbs in a serving, which is 10. And then I multiply those together, so 720, and then I divide by 100. So 7.2 is the actual load, right? Glycemic load ranges from 1 to 20, with anything 7 or below being, or 11 or below being considered low. So actually a watermelon, because of the water content and the actual carbs in a serving, is not something we need to avoid. Whereas if you look at just the index, you would say, oh wow, watermelon's so high, I want to avoid that. Or carrots are moderate, I should just stick to other kinds of vegetables. So I really want you to be careful, because it's given lots of fruits and veggies a bad rap because it hasn't considered serving or fiber content when we just look at the glycemic index. So looking at glycemic load is one way to really help manage and regulate how certain foods impact our blood sugar levels. There's still some controversy there because we don't eat foods alone typically. And with my clients, I never like somebody to eat a carb-only meal. So even with glycemic load, we want to look at how are we combining certain foods, because this load is looking at individual foods. But if I'm eating an apple and I'm putting peanut butter on it, or I'm having a string cheese with it, or I have a banana but I'm eating it in my Greek yogurt, those things are going to balance themselves out. If you can put a fat and a protein component with the carbohydrate, then that in and of itself will help to slow down that blood glucose spike and the insulin release process, because fats and proteins take longer for our bodies to break down. So it's helping to regulate, whereas if we have that straight carbohydrate meal, then the blood sugar response is very different. So adding a fat and a protein, looking at serving sizes. So at S2 Nutrition, we are not an elimination, restriction, no carb, low carb concept. I believe if it fits your macros, if it fits your bank account of carbs, fats, and proteins, then you can make it work. If you're really up for that sesame bagel and you know it's got a high load, maybe you just have half of it, because again, the load is based on serving size. So moderating servings and portions, adding and combining foods, and also spacing foods. If you have a higher sugar meal, if you have a higher glycemic meal, you want to give your body more time to deplete that glycogen. So just eat a little bit further into the day. Give yourself more time. Train after that meal. Move more. Do more things that are going to help to deplete the liver and glycogen stores, so that you're not in that excess and the blood sugar can come back down to homeostasis. So watch part 1 if you haven't. Go back and review. And just start to educate yourself. Start to look at how you can combine, how you can time meals to maximize the impact and the benefit of the carbohydrates that you're eating, and eliminate the potential for fat storage by making the right choices at the right times. And that's the key. It's not just cut them out, it's understand them and use them well. See you next time.